Hey everyone, welcome to Leveling Up Mental Health. I am Adolyn H, actor and cognitive scientist.
And I am Andrew Nicholson, local Calgary psychologist.
And today we have a friend of Andrew's who is also a developer in the video game field coming to talk to us about his ideas. He's going to pitch us a game.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to invest in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're making waves in the video game industry today.
110%.
Yeah.
But it's a very exciting conversation, and we get to see someone who has expertise from behind the scenes, which is super rare to get. So I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great conversation. I think so often we and even in our episodes, we've been talking to people on the mental health side of things. And so to talk to somebody that has that behind the scenes expertise on video games. And I'm just always, I love video games. So I love hearing the behind the scenes, the development, what goes into it, what goes through the brain of somebody who's developing them. I think it's so cool.
Yeah, me too. So without further ado, let's get to the interview.
Well, welcome to the podcast. Today we have a good friend of mine and a local Calgary game developer, Keith, on. Welcome to the podcast, Keith. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're very excited to have you. We haven't yet had a game developer. We have had some experts on the mental health side, and so it's nice to have an expert on the gaming side.
Yeah, hopefully I can be an expert on that side.
As expert in word to use here. Okay.
We also haven't had a friend other than me on the podcast, Andrew, and you didn't tell me you had friends outside of me.
That's true.
Yeah.
Adolyn's going to be very jealous.
I'm super
the entire
jealous of this.
episode.
Yeah, I'm going to be fuming.
Yeah. You don't have to say anything.
Yeah.
You can just sit there and we'll talk. Yeah. Well, why don't we just start off by saying a little bit about who you are and what kind of makes you relevant to our podcast today.
Yeah, so my name's Keith. I do a bit of game dev currently. Got my degree in information computer systems. I have worked through mental well-being issues in the past. I've been with a counselor, so I'm a big advocate of that side. I do a bit of game dev at the moment, and then in the past I did some streaming and YouTube content, that type of thing. But
yeah, awesome. We're super stoked to have you on because we've had people on the sort of front lines of video game, people who play the games and things like that, but no one doing the back end stuff. Mm-hmm. So what is a developer?
So the piece that I more am focused on is the actual programming side.
Right.
So with video games, programming and design, I should specify. With video games, there's so many different roles that you can have in a game development company. There's the art side, there's the audio, there's the actual programming, there's animations, which is kind of a separate field than the actual 3D modelers. And so there's so many different fields that are necessary to be in the industry, and doing it solo and with less people, you've got to wear multiple hats and, and all that. But for me, I'm more on the design and programming side, and then try to outsource as much as I can for the other stuff because I'm not an artist at all.
That's fair. But, yeah, I think that's a helpful piece that people might not know is just how much goes into game development. Like it makes sense when you think about it, but especially thinking, not just a small indie game, but then you get bigger and bigger to these AAA games and how big these studios get and how many different departments are all coming together to make something. Like it's a huge
What's
thing.
crazy, the one that I was always surprised by is the number of artists that work on games. So you'd think that most of it, you think game dev and tech, it's always like the programming side and the software.
Yeah.
And that's important. There's a lot of that. But you have the animation and the art, that takes so much time. And that's what shows the polish within the game and all those sorts of things that the viewer's actually seeing. The mechanics and all that are built through the systems, that's still a lot of work in there. But it's usually you have a team doing that, and then your level designers and the individuals that are actually building out the space, they might have no experience in software whatsoever. And then your artists, same thing. Like they're just 3D modelers entirely, and that's it.
Right. I think a lot of people have a misconception and they think, oh, if you make a game or like a AAA title, you can just copy and paste that again for the sequel. Is that kind of like it? Can you just like copy and paste the code, or like an artist is like, yeah, I'll just I don't have to redo any of this work?
So there's a little bit of reuse for sure, and you're often encouraged to, because you definitely want to be saving money in certain areas, because what you have teams of, like on the AAA side, you got teams of 400 plus.
Yeah, that's like making a movie.
Yeah,
that's
like
more
you've
than
got
a feature film. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So if you already have a 3D asset made, when I say 3D asset, talking like the lamp that's in the corner of the room, for example, if you're just like, or like a couch or anything, even the character models, those, you don't need to remodel a lamp if it's in the same art style as your next game. And so you can just reuse that. Same with your characters. A lot of, sure, you might find, you might create higher resolution models of those as the technology gets better. So because time's passed since you did the first game, but generally speaking, you're still using the same asset from the prior one. But the actual scripting and the movement through the space. So if there's a story or going from level to level, all of that is fresh every time that the game's being developed. You can't really copy that over. The game systems can be. So if you are, say you're doing a first person shooter, and the mechanics of how the gun plays and feels, that is something that you can pull over. And often I think people like neglect that part. They focus on the art being reused, but there is code under the hood that's also being reused. Yeah. But the biggest thing in most of the work when you're going from one title to the sequel is most of that is in the actual scripting and any new level design, all that sort of stuff that needs to be built for the sequel.
Yeah, one of the words I know often gets used in this space is sequels are iterative. Mm-hmm. You're taking what was done before, like with the mechanics of whatever the gameplay is, and you might copy a bunch of it over, so you're not reinventing the wheel every time, but then you're tweaking. Exactly. You're iterating on what's there to make it a little better, add a new system in on top of what's already there.
Well, and even across IP too, so it doesn't always have to be the like a sequel. You look at like Persona, those games. Persona 5 was a huge hit. Then they did Metaphor
Refantasia. Yeah.
Fantastic
I haven't even
title.
played it, and I know the title.
Yeah, that there's a lot of, if you look at those two games visually, very different. Yeah. Definitely new assets, definitely new animations, everything. But the combat at its core is still, and like the way that the day system's structured, all that is code that they had from before that they were definitely reusing. There's no question.
I always think about that with the Spider-Man and the Arkham games. Like the battle systems. Oh, yeah. They're kind of skins of each other, but obviously very different games.
Yeah, well, that's a good point.
That's even like, that's one of the big things within the industry is that as new mechanics and development comes out, borrowing and finding new ways to do certain systems. Yeah. Sure, those two games, different companies, they'd likely coded those separately. But once it's been done once and you've seen it, it's actually a lot easier to go, oh, okay, that's how I would code that system. Yeah. That's something that you can kind of adopt and borrow and move the industry forward a little bit. So
as a developer, you get to see the game being made behind the scenes. How much of the player experience are you thinking about when you're making the game, especially when you're talking about something iterative? Or is it more of a, like, I actually don't know. Do you ever get a dialogue? Do you do focus groups? Do you think these big games do that?
Yeah, so definitely. More so than I think people realize, especially on the AAA side. So for context, I'm definitely not in the AAA side.
Double A.
I'd like to say we're double A, but no, I work for context. I work at a studio called Nice X Games. We're about 6 people working there right now. 5 of us full time, and then external contract for other parts. But and that's usually like a fair size for an indie small studio group. It lets you do bigger things than just like a solo dev could, but it's not at the scale of like a AA. Your AA's start to be close to staff of 30, 40 people. It's usually where you see, and that's when you start getting to your like Expedition 33s and that style of team size. Yeah. Sorry, there was a question that led into that. I apologize. Sorry, this is a section.
No, this is great. This is great.
There, you asked a question that led me into that.
That's all right. Focus groups. Yeah. How much are focus groups used? And yeah.
So in regards to the focus group side of it, what often will happen is you'll have to have your playtesters, and you will have a lot of that towards, you try to get as much of it as early as possible. The smaller you are, it's a lot harder to find that sort of time and even finances to support getting people into tests, because you have to pay them, right? You can't just have, there's that side to it. There's companies that are dedicated just to playtesting that you reach out to them, they do that for QA. So, but most of the bigger companies, AAA, they'll have big teams on that. That's where you start to get some, often it's kind of memed on or joked on, that there'll be systems that are overly simplified, where it'll be like the game will tell you what to do. The dialogue in for example, like God of War or Horizon, it gets memed on, where the characters tell you out loud how to do the puzzle rather than letting you figure it out. That stems from playtesting, where people would be in that section, they'd get stuck there, they wouldn't know what to do, and then as a response to that, because they can't have people not progressing and hitting those walls and then stopping playing, they overcompensate and then put in audio cues like that, or big yellow bars on the thing that you like. That thing that you can climb on is a big yellow piece of tape or paint on everything. Right?
I think
that's why that stuff
Yeah.
exists, right?
The red barrel.
So that all comes often. That comes from playtesting and not from the developer in the first place. Sometimes it's intuitive from just like you'll build it out and think that you want to build what you want to play. And so from a developer's perspective, often there is a bit of thinking of your target audience, because you kind of have to. You have to make a thing that's going to sell. And so there is a piece of making sure that you understand who your market is. But there is also the side of you build what you want to play. Like you build the thing that you're passionate about and excited about. And that's kind of where we're at right now with Nice Axe. There is definitely like the marketing side of that I'm not a part of. That it's the business lead that does that side for the company. But the game we're working on is focused on, it's a co-op game where it can accommodate new players. So people that aren't familiar with games, it could be their first game. And so we're trying to merge this, like you have your hardcore gamer that wants to play with their partner or their kid. And then this is what that could potentially be is where we're coming from. So there is that, like,
very cool.
We have to play test that. I can't play test what it feels like to play the game for somebody brand new. We have to actually have people get on the controller and try that. So we've had a couple already in the very early prototyping, just because you have to get that game feel. But yeah, as far as the focus group side goes, it can be from as early as the prototyping, just moving the character around to see how it feels to move and get that right, because that's critical. And then towards the end, and that's your bug testing and does the game flow well? Where do people get stuck and that sort of stuff?
Huh. Yeah. So part of on this podcast, we really like to talk about the local, our local Calgary community. And I mean, from my experience or from what I know, I don't know if there's a lot of game developers in Calgary. It doesn't seem to be like the hot spot. I think there's lots in kind of out east, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. I think the closest we got BioWare in Edmonton. Yeah. But what is, like, as a developer, what is that community like in Calgary? Does it exist? What's been your experience? So there is a community in Calgary. Specifically, most of the people in Calgary are associated with Calgary Game Dev Association, CGDA. You can find them online if you're interested and you're in the Calgary area and you want to do dev work. They meet monthly. They'll have guest speakers on. They'll have people talk about getting investment in games, because that's one of the biggest issues is right now, especially, is finding financial support to get your dream project off the ground, sort of thing. And so CGDA helps with a lot of that. They introduce people to one another. They have game jams. There's 2 game jams that I've done with them. One that's just like local Calgary type, and then one that's more like Alberta. And so they
it's a great space to go to where you can interact with other developers and see what projects they're working on. They'll have once a week, you can go to a space where everybody's at, and you can kind of show your game around or ask like, hey, I'm having trouble with this, and people will help you out. And it's a really good community. But as far as like bigger studios, we don't really have much. There's a couple verging on the AA side. We used to have a bigger company, but unfortunately they actually they just recently closed their offices in Calgary a couple years ago. So it's a growing space for sure. There's opportunity. There's people that want to do it and to grow that space. The difficulty and the reason why it's so centralized to Vancouver, Edmonton is where you have a AAA studio, often that breeds and allows for the indies and the other startups and the AA. And it sounds a bit odd, but usually what happens is the people that are working in those spaces and they're training up, then they go off and start their own studio. And then those people train and work up, and then they start their own studios. And so it breeds this sort of larger space of community. And then on top of that, you also have the technology. So there's the mocap places that you go to. Those are all in certain areas, right? And we don't necessarily, Calgary's growing in that, especially because of film. Like there's a lot of growth in Calgary with like The Last of Us was filmed here, right?
Yeah.
And so that type of development also helps games, where we're starting to see a little bit more of just like the cross between industry that is actually starting to affect games as well. But it's growing. It's growing.
I was curious about that, and I'll be interested to see what happens in Calgary, because I know like the film industry has been growing more in Calgary over the last few years, and so neat to hear that those actually will help each other in some ways. So the other big part of our podcast, we talk about video games and mental health. And I know that's been an interest of yours, as specifically how these come together. And I don't want to say too much for you, but I know you worked on a pitch for a game that was a bit more specific in terms of incorporating mental health into the mechanics. So I was wondering if you could say more about that, why you wanted to pitch that,
So personally for me, I went through my own struggles through counseling that were kind of shaped. I mean, everybody kind of has that. When you go through counseling, it shapes who you are. It shapes a big part of who you are in the future, which I think is so important. And one of the things that I wanted to do was be able to merge and take my passion of game development and try to incorporate something that I find important to talk about. And it's just not a space that we see a whole lot of, is talking about mental wellness and having, within video games specifically, I should say, it's not something that is frequently done. There's games that get close. There's games that try to incorporate and build mechanics into their games that are that highlight mental topics. And so that space is something that I wanted to be a part of, or to try to push forward, is have a game that helps talk about or shine a light on depression, for example. And if somebody is able to play that game and then it helps them work through something in their own life, like that would be the dream for me. So that's the main reason, at least, why I wanted to start looking and diving into that space. And I've done a little bit of research. I say research, looking around and seeing what else is out there and trying to do self analysis of those spaces, like what's there currently. And it's just not a very developed space in games. And because it has the interactive element, because it has there's engagement there that allows somebody to experience in a way that you don't get with film and books. Or just like a conversation like this. So there is something I think that can be tapped into with games that can also be brought back into helping people like learn and work through their mental wellness. And
did you find anything out there when you were doing your research?
So there's definitely, when it comes to the mechanics, it's a little bit harder. So this is something it'd be interesting to talk more on. But before getting too deep into the weeds with the mechanics side, often one of the big things that we see in games, movies, all that sort of stuff is we highlight and talk about the theme of mental wellness. And there'll be amazing media that really dives in and has an evocative effect on someone. Like, I'll use an example, without spoiling. Expedition 33, phenomenal game. One of my favorite. It is up there and probably my top 5 games of all time now. And it has a phenomenal focus on grief and trauma around grief. It's such a core theme throughout that game. But the way that they approach that and talk about that theme is all done through the lens of cutscenes and dialogue that could be everything that makes that topic so good in that game could be a movie, truthfully. And from what I understand, they're making a movie of Expedition 33.
Very exciting.
But, and it's kind of the same. You look at The Last of Us, it's the same thing. There is a lot of trauma and things that Joel goes through. And there are topics there that they get close to. And in a really effective way, I think, especially the second, which there's a mechanic system there that I think would be interesting to talk about. But games often fall into this, we'll broach the topic, but only through cutscenes. And we'll have it be a part of the story and the character's growth, because that's what we know. That's what's worked in film. That's what's worked in books. That's how we talk about it. It's how a viewer gets to experience and see those characters going through something, and they can relate. And that's how we have, like, that's how it works in film. So why not do it in games, right? And so that space right now, that is usually the solution. That's usually how we see topics be talked about or showcased. That's not taking advantage of the medium. Yeah. The games are interactive, right? And how do you incorporate and have somebody feel or learn something about themselves through mechanics, like through just moving the character around or interacting with the game? That's not just watching a cutscene that could have been a movie or all that, right? Now, that's not to say that that's not important. Having Expedition 33 highlight and talk about grief while also being an incredible video game, that's amazing. That's so important. I still to think on, but it's so difficult. One of the things I was finding on the mechanic side is it's quite difficult to broach that consciously, because you can't. We were talking about a little bit when I was originally pitching the idea, is how do you incorporate it without making it a what's the word, like
boring,
a bummer,
without making it insensitive.
Yeah,
right?
there's a performative element to it as well.
Like, and I'll give an example.
Yeah.
So one of the ways of thinking about it is there's games that Darkest Dungeon is one that kind of has a mechanic in it that broaches. It gets really close, where the characters, as they go into, you send them off into these dungeons, and as they're moving around, they have like a sanity bar, and the more that you push them, the farther into the dungeon you send them, the harder that they have to fight to survive. They'll have effects on their sanity, and then they come back to town, and you have to decide how to help treat them. You can they send them to the bar to have a drink. You can send them to the nurse's station, sort of thing. There's different approaches that you can have as you build up and develop your town. All of that is done through a bar. That's just a bar that moves up and down, and it's effective for that game. Because when eventually you can feel bad if you have this hero that you've been focusing on and developing, and you don't want to lose them, but you're pushing them hard and their sanity is like way down when they come back. You got to give them a break and work on somebody else, but because you don't want them to die, you don't want them to run off or whatever, and you're trying to take care of these people. So it does a decent job of showing that, but how does that work if you had like a depression meter? Right, like if that was a depression bar,
feels pretty reductive.
Yeah,
your mental health is a stamina bar.
Reductive is a really great way of putting it.
Yeah.
Is these are really important topics that if you just break it down to a game mechanic like that, it's so hard to make it effective. Without potentially not causing harm, but the way everybody's depression and how they approach it, I think, is quite different. There is and how you come through that and how you work through your depression or anxiety, or you have, and sometimes you'll have a month that is worse than another, right? Like it's always an ongoing journey. And to sort of reduce it down to the example that I had was, you have a depression meter in the game, you hit a certain point, you go to camp, the next morning you wake up, that person just doesn't want to go. You try to send them out to the dungeon. No, I don't have the energy. I'm worn out. I can't go. And it's like, that's fair, but that's not how that's not what happens to everybody with depression. Sometimes they will mask it and they'll push on in spite of it and make it worse. And so it's to sort of put a mechanic, you're taking something that isn't logical and you're trying to apply math and software and mechanics and making it logical.
It's interesting.
And it's a very difficult space to, I think, navigate. Some of the games, there are games that have done it well. Am I okay to broach a little bit spoiler towards Last of Us 2?
I think so.
It's been out for a while. The HBO's already talked about it a little bit.
It's been out for a few years. Spoiler warning,
yes.
people can skip ahead.
Okay.
A couple minutes.
It's super, super brief, but in The Last of Us 2, there's a point in the game where it transitions you to playing as a different character. That transition point was, I think, using mechanics in a really, really effective way that a lot of people may not have even registered. Some people just were like, no, I'm done. I'm not playing the game anymore. I don't want to play as this person. Right. But when the intent of that is, they are literally, the game is forcing you to walk a mile in the other person's shoes. That's what it's doing. And that whole section of the game, by the end of it, if you get through that whole section, you do feel for that character. You might not. That's fine. Not everybody's going to like that character. But I'm being slightly vague. Intentionally for the spoiler side. But anybody that's played it, I should know what I'm talking about. And that transition and that forcing you as a player, that's so uncommon in video games, to be like, we're going to make you play as somebody that you probably don't want to play as. You don't like this person, and we're going to make you do it. That's the only way you can continue. You don't get to play as the other characters, and you have to learn to do that. And that forces, using game systems and mechanics, for you to kind of approach and learn something from the game. So I think that was actually quite effective. Whether or not the rest of it, and you vibe with Last of Us 2 or The Last of Us as a whole, totally separate from that conversation. But that in and of itself, I think, is something that they did really, really well that we just don't often see.
We don't even see it in movies sometimes too. So spoiler alert, there's a scene in Spider-Man where he loses a certain uncle. What? I know, I bet you've never heard of this storyline before, but it always feels like they force you to bounce back right away. So like even in the movies, he has to be hero the very next day. And then they often just super cut it with like a funeral scene or something like that, and they're like, that's it. And grief is over, and I feel like it would be interesting to explore, especially because you said the medium allows you to actually walk a mile in the person's shoes. It would be amazing to be able to explore, like, no, but what does prolonged grief look like? Or what does prolonged depression look like? Or what is, like, you're in the middle of a battle and you get beaten in the game and you come back and now you're anxious to do that battle again. And that affects your health bar or your moves or your ability to respond, and there's no fear sense in the game too. Like, there's lots of mechanics to show like you're either doing really well or doing really bad, but nothing to show a journey of those two things. It's almost all or nothing, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, it's a space that I'm really wanting to dive more into. Like, to give a bit of a pitch on what I was looking at.
Do it, pitch us.
Yeah,
we'll invest in it.
Yeah, so this is
Welcome
still really
to
rough.
Leveling Up Mental Health Den.
This is quite still rough around the edges, but one of the reason that I didn't push forward in the direction was because, again, it's how do you do it without it being insensitive?
Right.
That side of it, and how do you approach it correctly? And so, unfortunately, I had to bench the idea. But what I was originally looking at doing was having a game where you are kind of like Inside Out, where you are inside somebody's mind. You are the character's mind, and they are the character that you are representing, the character whose mind you are taking part of, is dealing with depression. They have some struggles. They have memory snippets, and you very much the same as Inside Out. Now, how do you represent that in an interesting game system? So I was thinking, well, you could have it be like a city builder where you're building different parts of the mind and it's represented by different buildings, and you can make it a tower defense or something where the
bad thoughts
are coming in, and it's little enemies that are walking towards, and you have the defenses that you set up, and it could be that you're incurred, like the person goes to counseling that day, and then you get more towers to set up. Like that's your resource.
Yeah, those are like the tools from the therapy become new. Yeah.
And so how do you represent the tools? How do you represent those concepts in a video game that still makes the game fun and engaging without feeling like it's forced? And
picturing Overcooked, but in your brain. That's what I'm picturing. I mean,
it's not that direction either. But so then to that end too is you could make it more like a CRPG, like a Diablo style game, or as well, where the player goes out and then breaks down a wall that had been walled off, and they were closing off a memory, and so you have to fight off a boss or break down that barrier to then go through and help. Like then you see the memory of that sequence or something to understand the character, and so the whole game arc would be learning who this person is that you're actually like in their mind. You could kind of take it, you could go the other direction and go more like the Psychonauts way, where I don't know if you've played Psychonauts, but in it you're going into people's brains and it's all platformers and stuff. The representation that you're moving through is a representation of their mind. It's like the manifestation of their thoughts and personality. And so it's a fun, effective way to do it. They do it more comedic, but you could do something similar where it's not actually like the Inside Out idea. It could be you are somebody going into the mind of this person to help them. You could have it be that, but
have you played Roku? It's an indie platform game on Switch. They do something similar. Not similar. I don't even know what. It has no comparison in my brain actually. But you're playing as a young girl who loses her brother to the spirits of the forest. And as she starts to unlock more and more of the forest, she unlocks parts of her brain that is like has been traumatized. So a lot of those memories have been suppressed, and you get to learn more about her past and that sort of thing. So I think it did a really interesting job of like showing trauma, but through like a spiritual lens. And it had, I think it's a Swedish developer, so it had like myths and mythology and stuff like that from that. So it was really interesting. And then another game that comes to mind is It Takes Two. Have you played that one?
Yeah.
And that's an interesting way of doing, I mean, it's not grief or trauma in terms of mental health, but it's interpersonal relationships.
Exactly, yeah.
And then you also see the experience of the daughter seeing her parents go through that as well. And you get to really see the mental health of the kid, but like in an incredibly abstract way.
There are some games that broach it really well. It's just such ironically enough, a lot of the sort of deeper approaches or the more abstract ones tend to verge more towards like the horror side.
I was gonna say there's a lot of horror games.
Like you look at not Silent Hill 2 and even now Silent Hill F. Both those games, that's what they are. Like they're talking about trauma. That's what those games are at their core. And it's interesting that for some reason that space like has to be a horror game, like we have to approach it that way.
I wonder if that's part of what it feels like for people,
and
right?
that's
like
fair.
When you're going through it,
exactly,
it is a horror experience in a way, right? And when people are going through trauma and experiencing flashbacks and all of the things, like it really is, it's like a horror movie that you're living. And I think some people would explain it that way. So that does, in some ways, it feels like the natural outlet in games. But I agree, it doesn't have to be that necessarily.
Well, and it also, again, I don't want to keep going on the cutscene / theming versus mechanics, but even in the horror side, it is kind of that direction.
It's
the
theme.
Right. It's the visual element.
Yeah.
Right?
At the end of the day, it's still a third person shooter or
correct.
whatever.
Right. Like, but Silent Hill 2, as an example, when you're moving through that game, the visuals and everything that you're seeing and the way that the themes of what that means are so deep and incredibly well done. And to be fair, that's not the interaction with that space is still game mechanics. So when you're moving through it and where you're looking and engaging with and whether or not you find notes and how deep you want to go with it, that is the director's touch. That's the art on the game. Whereas a film, it's start finish, right? Like it's predetermined for you. So you can still have cool or not cool. You can still have really unique visual representation of that trauma. That is the monsters in the space are manifestations of that thought or whatever. And Silent Hill is known for that, of like the visual aesthetic of the enemies is the sort of trauma of whatever that person was dealing with. Silent Hill F does it really, really well. But again, like broaching more towards mechanics, it's just there's not a whole lot that broaches it. And it's something that I think we can, as an industry, I think it's something that we should be taking a closer look at for sure.
So why do you think that? What's your interest in the mechanic side of things over the themes?
I just think because of the when you're interacting with something, there is, if we're making a game, the thing that makes games stand out separately from other medium is that they're interactive. And to not leverage that side of the industry, you could just make a movie. You could just make it a book. And that's not to say that, again, Expedition 33 is one of my favorite games. And it is phenomenal in what it does. And to say that we shouldn't have that's not the point at all. We should.
Yeah.
It's not a
criticism.
criticism. You're not saying
No,
that,
exactly.
Yeah,
Like
it's just saying the potential of what
there's
could
so
be
much
done.
more potential when that's not being touched. And truthfully, this is kind of across the industry as a whole, because it's still quite a young industry in comparison to film. Like film's been around for a long time. They've had chance to learn how to tell a story. How do you effectively use this angle shot? What does it look like? Those are all things that have been studied. Film study is massive, right?
Well, and cinematics were introduced to video games fairly late too.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
So even the story side is
the story side was
really
never...
rich stories. I mean, there've been some really strong stories. Like growing up, I was a huge Final Fantasy fan.
Yeah,
and
me too.
Arguably, those games, I still love those stories.
Yeah.
Storytelling in games has been around for a hot minute, but they've gotten really good recently.
Yeah.
You have really strong character and really strong, just with some of it's just the technology of being able to properly animate and showcase visual expression. Silent Hill 2, again, it's just a recent game that came out. The original is not recent, but
the remake.
If you look at the original Silent Hill 2 and the technology limitations back then, and now with all of the new updates that they did and remodeling and animations that they did to the character's face, the effect that has on your understanding of the lead character, massive. It's not just like pixels on a screen. It's actually somebody that you're seeing their facial expressions and like understanding when somebody's eyes just adjust. We get that. There's something there. And so games are at that point now where that's not a problem anymore. Mocap and facial stuff we've kind of mastered it to a point where, we can get better. And graphics and technology are still going to progress.
And that's more of a price point.
Exactly. That's where you start. Yeah, exactly. But it's become accessible to be able to do stuff like that with game engines. Like Expedition 33, the visuals in that game are insane. Yeah. And that team was the small size team. And their visuals are better than most AAA. Yeah. Truthfully. Yep. And that's because of tools like Unreal Engine and the stuff that they can bring into that support that.
And also they had years and years of expertise. Like that development team was filled with like experts from all over the AAA titles that came together. Yeah.
They actually, funnily enough, they didn't. the two leads were
the lead developers. Yeah.
The two guys were, but the rest of the team. So the lead writer, the guy that did the music, the marketing side, the hires, the actual individuals that were working on it. Yeah. They may have had a little bit more experience, but the actual lead individuals were almost all brand new people.
Oh, really? Because I thought a lot of them were former Ubisoft.
They're two guys. Yeah. So the main two guys were former Ubisoft, and he basically knew that the game that he wanted to pitch would never be able to be made. And so he branched off and started his own studio, brought on this other guy from Ubisoft. But the writer had never written a video game before. The music, first time making video game music.
Cool.
So there's a phenomenal. It's a really long watch, but there's a Skill Up did a almost 2-hour documentary on the making of that game where they talk to the team. It's a wonderful watch. It doesn't spoil the game at all, and it is highly recommended if you're interested in the making of side of the industry. It's also a little bit tough because like it's unheard of to have that level of success.
It's like lightning in a bottle.
And it is like, it's not to say and discredit that you can't do that, because you can. And truthfully, the reason that was able to happen is because he had so much experience from Ubisoft. The lead guy knew what talent to look for and how to tap into those things and see the passion and drive. And the people that he brought on, it was during COVID. And there were so many people that were looking to find something new. We're fine to be a little bit more scrappy. To maybe work for a little bit less and try something new.
It's the passion.
Yeah,
right?
100%. And he saw it, right?
Yeah.
That's him.
But
That's
it's
not luck.
lightning in a bottle. Like we always say, as if like, oh my gosh, it's some magical thing. But it's almost like if you look at any game, book, movie that has critical acclaim or that the masses love or that I love, I'm like, yeah, but it's always filled with passion. Like that's the lightning in the bottle.
Exactly.
So you want lightning in a bottle, find passion. People are actually interested in doing this, not just because they're like, oh, this is my job. And I think game developers are a little scared of that now. They're like, oh my gosh, these games are coming out that are doing so well. I thought we had to spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to keep selling games. And I thought we could just copy and paste and keep making the same games again and again. And I think a lot of gamers are like, no, this is boring. I want to feel what Expedition did or what Baldur's Gate did, or, you know, even games that have the game loop like Fortnite, it kind of a lightning in a bottle too. You know, I don't necessarily resonate with that game in terms of the story or anything like that, but they figured out a game loop that people loved, you know, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't like, let's try to figure out how much money as we can make. I think that came later, but
you know, I definitely had that part later, but
but some of these games, there's a whole faction of people that aren't interested in the microtransactions or the game loop like Fortnite, and they're just like, I just want to play a game that I can beat over a couple of weeks and it leaves me with something. And to your point with mental health, I think some games do that really well. There's a game, do you ever play Journey?
Yeah, 100%.
And I was like,
Journey.
it's
Phenomenal.
not a mental health game, like, you know, but I remember sitting there and be like, my mental health feels really good right now, you know.
There's a bunch of games since Journey that
Flower.
The Pathless is a big one recently. I think that one 5 years ago. A phenomenal game. Same developer side. Almost the same studio. Abzu was another one in that field. They just actually, the Sword in the Sea just came out. And that's from one of the guys that made Journey.
But I would argue they have an interesting mechanic. Actually, it's far more abstract, but it's a really unique way. And in some ways, I'm like, this does describe mental health to me, but not in ways I can put into words.
It's definitely more abstract. For sure. And it's more. Those games are the typical like, it's the journey, not the destination thing. That is those games as a whole. So another really interesting one that does kind of really effectively work with mechanics is a lot of walking sims actually do a really, really good job of not being the cutscene while also still really getting it right.
Because they're making you kind of walk through this space.
And you're like learning about the character that you're playing as.
I think you've Gone Home?
Gone Home. What Remains of Edith Finch.
Oh, yeah.
Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Those types of games, What Remains of Edith Finch is just phenomenal. But they do a really interesting job. And it kind of verges on the cutscene, but you're walking through a space and interacting with memories and learning about the life of this character. And because you're interacting in it, and it's not just like watching a movie or watching characters talk to one another, you're actually engaging with the house and interacting with objects that then maybe spark a memory or show a little bit of a gameplay sequence. That is one that really did a good job of incorporating mechanics. Another one, it would be Hellblade.
Yeah, this is one I want to play but haven't played.
It's a phenomenal game. I haven't played the second one yet, to be fair, but the use of 3D audio in that game, it's insane. So, and that is full on the mechanics of it being, you can't do what it did in film. It's not like it is truly, it is an interactive experience where it uses 3D audio and has voices coming from different directions at different volumes. And so if you have, it does require, unfortunately, having a proper headphones to really, really, truly get the experience out of it. But man, it is, you do really think that like what it's like, I'm sure what it's like to actually experience that isn't the same. To actually hear voices in your head and have that struggle. Obviously it's probably more than just playing a video game. Yeah. However, it is the closest that I've ever been to be like, whoa, that like it is, you almost at times want to take the headphones off because you just feel like you're going crazy with just the way that the voices and having it come from different directions. And it's just a really chilling feeling.
Yeah. That's cool. Well, I think that speaks to this whole interactivity component, 100%. Right?
Yeah. That is a really good example.
And maybe it's thinking, I mean, kind of what I'm picking up through this conversation too, is it's like we've said, there are games that have done it, but it's also thinking about it's just different mechanics. Like the narrative mechanics have been done in different ways. The audio mechanics in Hellblade have been used for that purpose. But it's some of the mechanics around like even just the basic movement of a character. It sounds like that's where it's been more difficult, or where we haven't seen it as much, because that's where it either feels like it's being reductive or getting in the way of the fun. Like, not that every game has to be fun in the traditional sense. Again, Last of Us 2, I think a lot of people talk about that as like, I didn't have a fun time playing Last of Us 2. It was a miserable experience, but that was the point. Though the mechanics were still I would still say the mechanics were fun. It's just the narrative was oppressive. And I can see that being one of the difficulties, is how do you make something that is still an enjoyable experience to play, to engage with, but also crosses over into these types of mechanics. Like, I think that would be really hard.
It's the kind of the difficulty that I found myself in when I was looking at let's make it a city management game with tower defense, and that you can do it, but it just, if I'm going to do it, I want to do it right. And so I wanted to give myself a little bit more time on the project to really navigate and see how can I do this in a way that's respectful while also, I think, helpful. Because that's the piece of it, is I don't want to just make it unless it is something that I feel for myself. And part of I think what I need to find moving forward for when I do broach working on that again, is rather than trying to make the mechanics or try to have this one size fits all depression solution, that, because it's hard not to go that direction with games when it's a mechanic, because you kind of have to have like, it's the logical, okay, well, this is the thing that happened and this is the consequence, because games run on math. You have to have something that's driving that system. And so what the difficulty is, everybody has a different approach to their depression, how it affects them. And so if you take it, I think, more from, this is, I don't want to say art, but like putting the director's stamp on it more and saying, okay, this is how it is for me. If anybody else reflects with that, great. If not, that's okay. And it doesn't have to be like, this is the accurate representation of depression in video games as a mechanic. It can be, this is my representation of how depression affects me. And if that makes sense to you and it's vibing, great. If that helps you process something, great. If it doesn't, that's okay too. Like, and I think when I was originally approaching it, I was trying to be more, I don't want to say clinical, but like I was trying to make it more purposeful and helpful for somebody, rather than just being, if it works for you, great, and have it be in that space. Because I don't think, short of, and this, I don't want to say it's not possible, but having it be a more clinical mechanic that is like it is a solution for all depression. I don't think that is possible, really.
No. Well, and even like from a clinical standpoint, it's not how it works either. Right?
Exactly.
Like, yeah. People go to different forms of therapy for a reason, right? Something that works, challenging thoughts, and CBT works for some people. Going a more mindful meditation route works for other people. Some people have to address trauma, like some people all of the above. It's
There's
very
medicinal
different.
interventions that have nothing to do with your thought patterns. It's literally
Yeah.
I mean, but games are getting more and more complex, and now with the advent of AI and the ability to branch chains, storytelling, I'm curious if you think there are any risks to some of this stuff, especially with the immersive aspect of it, where now in virtual reality games, like what would it look like if you were actually not just playing with this distance, you were actually the character going through depression? Is there a risk of
That's definitely a concern.
Yeah.
That was a concern with the original idea, is as soon as you're portraying anything, that has to be a part of the conversation, I think, even if it is just a theme, even if it is like people that pick up The Last of Us 2 may not have realized how deep that game goes on its and how dark it gets, right? And they might not have wanted that, and it could harm them.
Yeah, it's
and
very
you
triggering.
have to be aware of that, I think. It's the same thing with the game side, is no matter what, I think if you're broaching topics like that, there is always the risk of potentially having a trigger for someone, that it could be. I lost a friend when I was 14, and it was quite unexpected. And I've now since, it took me a long time to come to terms with it and work through that grief. But whenever there's death of a friend in games, it makes me think of it, right? Mm-hmm. I'm at a place in my life where I'm okay with that. There are other people who aren't, right? Mm-hmm. And I can't imagine what I would do if there was if I replayed I'm a father now. If I replayed The Last of Us 1 and that first 10-minute sequence, I don't think I could keep playing that game, man. I would have to stop. Yeah. And I can't imagine that sequence if you had lost a child and then watched that. You would be like, I'm out. And you'd have no idea that that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
So there are always going to be, I think it's a thing you have to acknowledge when you're making art and you're making a game, movie, anything, that what you're doing and the story you're telling and the characters, all of that, mechanics, everything there has to be an understanding that this could, as much as you're wanting it to help someone and have a good experience for somebody to sort of reflect on, it can have the reverse as well, of sending somebody spiraling, or have it be I just set them off for their day or month.
Yeah. It's an interesting duality. And like you said, I think any form of art faces that, because the whole goal is to give somebody an experience. Mm-hmm. And then games, you're adding in this, I'm giving you an interactive experience. And it's interesting to think about, because again, I mean, I talked about it earlier with The Last of Us 2. I called it a very miserable experience. I mean, I did it. I love the game. But I haven't replayed it because I don't want to feel that way again.
It's not a replayable.
But that was kind of the point. But also, I mean, that's part of what you're giving people. It's interesting.
Anyone's allowed to tell any story they want.
Yeah.
But we asked this question a while ago with one of our other guests, which is how much of a responsibility as a developer do you have? And I'm actually curious on the flip side too, where, I brought up Fortnite and things like that. Some of these game loops have a really negative effect on your mental health. So they're not talking about mental health, but they still have a terrible effect on your mental health.
Yes.
Do developers have a responsibility to think about those things, or is it just let's make that money?
So this is... I think this is a really important conversation to it, is that games do have that, as soon as you start putting in microtransactions and the loot boxes and the gambling side of it, because it becomes gambling. Whether or not some people in the industry want to talk about it that way, loot boxes are gambling. It just is. And that effect that has on people, and it affects their finances. It affects you're breeding on the insecurities of not having the latest skin in Fortnite, and you're doing that with kids most of the time. Mm-hmm. And it is a space that the thing, and I don't want to cause a separation in where we talk about games, but the developer and the publisher, there is a gap there. And most developers just want to make the game that they're passionate about. The money side of it is something that they have to do to keep the lights on, as everybody does with their job, right? But at the end of the day, most people don't get into games because they want to make bank. Truthfully, it's not why.
Well, and also you're not seeing the bank for the microtransactions anyways.
No, it's the publisher.
So,
right? And there are some devs that have gone down that road, and there are people that get into the mobile industry, and that's all they do. And I get it. Like, I understand that they're taking, I don't want to say taking advantage, but really, like, they're leveraging the fact that they can do that. And so they get into the space specifically for that, just to make money.
The time it takes to make a game have like compressed, but the expectations from players of what that game can give them has like exponentially increased over time. So, but games are still in the price point that's kind of still maybe a little bit reasonable, given the fact that it takes 3 years to make and millions of dollars with hundreds and hundreds of people on it. And I think there's such an unfair sometimes expectation of developers and people who have to make the game in a short amount of time just to like meet the Q1, Q2, Q3 quarterlies, you know, when I think a lot of people are like, we would rather you spend the time, make a good game that we'll enjoy than try to rush something.
So there's a mix here.
Yeah.
And we often, within the games playing community, often it is popular to kind of hate on the publisher and talk about that we're just like getting bad games right now. And it's like, the games industry right now, truthfully, is better than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Man, this year has been insane for games. Like, it's ridiculous. Just every time a new game comes out, I'm like, oh my God, that's another game of the year contender.
Yeah, but the expectations have just gone so unfairly high.
What's interesting is there are a lot of, like, again, Expedition 33, Kingdom Deliverance 2, even It Takes Two dev, their newest game came out this year. Split Fiction.
Yeah.
Thank
Split
you.
Fiction, yeah.
Split Fiction. Those games weren't necessarily big AAA titles, but they have a lot of time that went into them. Like Expedition 33 was, I think, 5-year dev time.
Yeah.
Dev, we like to think that dev times are getting shorter, and that, well, why not? There's new tools. Unreal is great. There's so many, like, the ability and the speed and with AI and stuff like that. It's arguably games are getting easier to make, and that's true in the sense of our indie studio, 6 people, we're just using Unreal, and the stuff that it does for you is insane, right? And this is true of Unity and most other game engines, is that there is so much that those engines do for the developer. That doesn't change the fact that art and animation and the polish and optimization of the game and the writing and the audio, there's so many things that go into games that the tech of building the game has made it a bit quicker. But the expectation of the visual, the fidelity, and even, again, like the optimization side, right now, it's a huge, that constantly talked about, games are constantly coming out and the frame rate's horrible on PC and whatever. And the reason some of that is happening is because, one, there's restrictions on time, and optimization is usually one of the last things that devs will do. Unfortunately, should be a part of the conversation from get-go. But the amount of time that goes into actually making games, it in many ways, it's getting longer with some of these devs, not shorter. And it's not consistent. And it's not the same across the industry even. Like Naughty Dog, their newest game, guaranteed it's going to be a while still. We've seen, I think, Intergalactic, something
Intergalactic,
like that.
yeah.
Their new one, when it comes out, guaranteed that's going to have been in a dev cycle for bare minimum 5 years. I'd be shocked if they get it less than that, right? And that's a lot of money for a publisher to back early for a really long time. And it's like you're talking 120 mil plus easy for that cycle, if not more, right? Some of the games, like I think Spider-Man 2 was, I could maybe source, but close to 300 million on some of these games. GTA 6 is rumored to be like 500 million plus.
Yeah.
And so to recoup those costs is a lot. That's not to say that publishers should be putting in microtransactions and all these other things.
No, we are not saying that.
There is something to be said for just the sale of the game doesn't always do it. 5 million sales, just did quick math, right? 5 million sales of a game. That's a game performing really well. That's not your every game. That's a game that really stood out. 15 million, that's your Elden Rings. 30 million, that's your COD, right? That is the number of sales. If you take the price of the game and say 5 million copies sold, average around $50 per sale, you're looking at 250 million. If my math is right, that's
Sounds
correct.
Yeah. 5 times 5. Yeah.
So if your costs, and that's not even including cuts or the cost that goes to the platform holder, so like 30% goes to Steam right away, 30% goes to PlayStation, right? Wherever you're launching it. So you only have 70% of that or sale value. Now that 70% probably is even getting shorter because you've got money going to Unreal for using their engine. You've got money going to the publisher because they need and so it just trickles down and down and down and down. And finally, the cost of what was a 300 million project, you have to sell more than 5 million copies. You just have to even get close to even cutting back.
Or you increase your prices.
Right?
Right.
And so, and I say 50, obviously games are now
80,
like they're
100.
higher.
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying 50 is because when we hit those 5 to 10, 15, they've been on sale for 20% off. They've been, there are people that have bought the game, returned it, or have sold it to their friend, gone to GameStop and returned it, and somebody else bought it, right? The dev doesn't see that money. So there are realities that come with game making that unfortunately, as much as it's not fun, but there is a part of it where the finances and the publisher and being able that's why getting investment right now is so difficult because it's such an unknown as to whether or not something will be able to make its money back, just even breaking even. And then of course it's not just that, it has to make 10% more for stockholders, right? And so as soon as you start talking investment and all that, it's such a harder conversation. And then on top of that, brings back to mental health, is how can you make sure that it is in your best interest for the gamer, that you're not abusing their wallet and doing loot boxes because you have to make ends meet. And most of the games, when we look at them and talk about loot boxes and microtransactions and all that, these companies are making billions of dollars, right? So it's hard not to look at that and go, you're making more than enough. But it's not always the case.
Right.
And DLC and microtransactions and like looking at Capcom, Dragon's Dogma, it has microtransactions in it, right? Dragon's Dogma 2 has microtransactions. It's not necessary. You don't need it. But those microtransactions help the actual, like the fact that we even get the game and maybe get a third, right?
Yeah.
Without it, maybe we wouldn't even get that close because the studio would fall apart. And we're just seeing studios close left, right, and center because they're not making enough money, right?
Yeah. It's a complex picture.
It is.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately it's not a fun one to talk about because you wish it was that you could just spend 6 years making a game, get it as perfect and polished as you want. The dev, I promise you, every dev who's ever worked on a game wants more time and wants to make it perfect and wants their dream game.
It's actually kind of so nuts to think about, though, like how many hours you can put into a game for how much you're spending.
Yeah.
It's actually quite a pretty good trade-off, you know.
You
like,
think about how much movies cost now to go to.
Yeah, or like you go to a concert and you get to see your favorite celebrity or whatever, but that's a 3-hour experience that you're willing to spend $600, $700 at a time.
Yeah.
But you're not going to do that for a game that's going to give you, and people are like, well, I don't care. I put 250 hours into this. And you're like, yeah, for like $80.
Yeah.
That's a big portion of your life. But I don't want to pay any more than this. And you're like, I'm trying to give the publisher the benefit of the doubt where I'm like, but they also need to make the money. And I'm coming from the acting side. a lot of people underestimate, just like you were saying at the start of the interview, how many people are involved at every step. And these are good-hearted, well-meaning people trying to make ends meet, making $50,000 a year at most sometimes, working 12, 14-hour days just to get you your 250 hours, you know? And maybe we can give a little bit more for some things that make sense, you know? Like, I would love to be able to give I forgot the studio that did Expedition, but like, you know, it's like take money, make another one, you know, like do that, you know. So
I mean, they're
they're
good
doing
now.
okay. Yeah.
They're doing all right. Let's be clear.
They're doing fine.
I'm sure that's winning game of the year for me.
Yeah.
I hope it's phenomenal. Anyway, you're right. I not to kind of loop back a little bit because you brought something up really interesting that we kind of verged away from, but when we're talking about, do developers consider the impact of the game and the consequences that can have on mental health? There's actually a really fun story from back with World of Warcraft. When World of Warcraft first,
I lost Andrew to World of Warcraft in high school. So.
I played it. I played my fair share.
Okay.
During the beta, they were finding and discovering that people were spending way too much time, and they wanted to have a bit of respect for the player and their time, and so the rest mechanic that is in the game, where if you rested it in, you get double like rested XP.
Right.
Yeah.
That stemmed from encouraging the player to have a step back because there's a reward when you come back later. That's where that stemmed from. Was a discussion of, okay, well, we have to be respectful. We can't abuse, like there is, and even how long does it take to progress? How much grinding do you have to do?
Yeah.
Those are conversations that devs have because there is an ethical decision that you are actually making when you're designing stuff like that. Now, some of that does also play into how much can we push that to make enough money? Right. And that obviously that's when the publisher and the marketing side tends to come in. But the developer tends to have to be part of that conversation because they're the ones that are tweaking the numbers under the hood.
It's so funny to me though, because I feel like when things make logical sense to players, they're actually willing to dish out money for it, you know? But when it feels like it's just like a throw out, that's when it feels insulting. And then you're like, well, now I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
Or now I have to do it to keep up with people, but I don't feel good about myself doing this. And I'm like, like you said, if you just baked something naturally into the game, that's sure you're like, okay, well, I got to spend an extra this, or I like it. You know, I think Rocket League used to do this really well, not in the later seasons, from the earlier seasons when it's like, oh, I could get the Batmobile and it's like $3 and you're like, fine, I'll get that just to play the game because it was free anyways to
Horse
play
armor.
the game. yeah. But yeah, it's interesting. But it's a push and pull conversation. But it's cool to see that some developers are thinking about the other side where they're like, I'm actually trying to help your mental health with.
Yeah.
It is actually more general, I would say, in the industry that is a part of the conversation.
Wow.
That the developers, when you're implementing mechanics, there is thought that has to go into what does that actually, how is the player responding? How does it make them feel? How are they engaging with that system? And the conversation, like one of the big ones that maybe is the easiest to understand is that progression side of like, how long does it take to get from one level to the next? And what is the perfect balance of reward for the player, time for the player, how does that look for the next section of the game, and how much time have they put towards it? Those sorts of decisions, especially on the RPG side where you've got leveling systems, those sorts of decisions are core. And part of that conversation is like, is it going to take too much time? Are we going to lose the player's interest? Is it unfair to them to need to put in this much time in World of Warcraft to hit level 60 back then?
Yeah.
But how can we encourage them to step away and have put in something like the rest system? What they did for the rest system, and it's a kind of a unique psychology piece with game dev, is they had originally done a test where after a certain point of playing in WoW, they would reduce the amount of XP that you would get by half. What the exact math, I can't quite remember, but it was by half. And then players saw it as a penalty because they were being penalized for staying on. Instead, what they ended up doing is flipping it and adding it to the rested piece, where if you are rested and you've come back, it's not that you're at normal XP, you're getting double XP when you come back from being rested. So all they did is flip it from being, if you step away, you're going to get, or if you don't step away, you're going to be penalized for and get half XP on everything. But if you step away and come back, you're going to get double, which effectively, at the end of the day, the result that has in progression
the same.
is mathematically identical.
Yeah, but positive reinforcement versus
we know that it's
fascinating.
Right? Reward
From
is always more effective than punishment.
And across the board when they were doing the testing and player testing on that, it just is,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Player psychology.
awesome.
But.
Yeah. So we've been talking for a while. We're coming to the end of the conversation. We always like to ask a couple final questions to our guests to kind of wrap things up. So one being, what game had the biggest impact on you growing up? Positive, negative, whatever.
Whew, that is a loaded question.
I know it is.
So growing up, I would say just Final Fantasy in general probably had the biggest impact on me. The first game that I ever remember playing that actually blew me away was Chrono Trigger. That was my intro. That's why it's Final Fantasy. That's
I
why.
love that game. I just replayed it.
So good.
I've still never played it.
He still hasn't played it. And I've been trying to get him to play it.
I'm still on the. I'm hoping for that to be a remake at some point.
Too.
I know everybody is. It's that and 8 and 9 for Final Fantasy. I know that there's been conversation of a 9 remake.
There's rumors
for
all
forever.
over the place.
There's constantly rumors, but
Need to do Chrono Trigger and then Chrono Cross.
I actually haven't played Chrono Cross, believe it or not.
Cross is great.
But when I was growing up, that was my first interaction with Chrono Trigger. And funnily enough, it was when I was maybe 5 or 6. And I had been over at my older cousin's place. He was 15, 16 at the time. And I just remember playing it with him and seeing a section of the game where it's like the future version of future area when you find the robot companion.
Yeah.
And you're moving through this sort of wasteland. And I had this visual in my brain of that as a kid. And then when I was, I want to say 13 or 14, I found Chrono Trigger again because I think they remade it for the DS.
Yeah, they made it for the PlayStation again. So it was just, and then they added cinematics, and then they added the DS version of it.
So when they did it on the DS, I played it, and then I played an emulator version of it to play the original.
Yeah, because the original didn't have the cinematics.
Yes.
On it, so yeah.
So when it was redone, I was like, oh, I'll play this game. Well, this looks cool. Everybody's talking about Chrono Trigger. And I got to that section. I'm like, this is the game from my childhood because I didn't know. I made the connection.
Oh, what a good feeling that must have been.
I was
That's so
this
cool.
is the one because it had such an impact on me, but I didn't know the name. It was 5, 6, right? Like I just was watching and kind of like idolized that cousin. He was just this older, older cousin that was playing video games. And I was just like, oh, that's so cool. That's awesome. So that was Chrono Trigger, and then that, of course, that
led you into the Final
Fantasy
games, the CRPGs,
and truthfully,
JRPGs.
Before that, I'd played a bunch of other things like Chips Challenge and the random little small games. And even Pokemon, I think I played before Final Fantasy VII. But true, like the time that I was like, no, this is it. I'm a gamer, was I borrowed my friend's PS1 because I didn't have one. He had Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. And I played through all 3 games back to back.
What a good feeling. What a good feeling.
Changed your life.
Yeah.
Truthfully, like it definitely shaped who I am a ton, and which kind of leans into this year. We've already talked about it a little bit, but Expedition 33, Final Fantasy VIII, one of my favorite games, is the main inspiration for that game, and it is so good. That's cool. It's JRPGs are back, man.
Yes, as they deserve to be.
Fantastic.
The last question we always end with
Sure.
is, do you think video games are the hero or the villain when it comes to someone's story or their mental health?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think it can be both. It really depends on the person. I think for me personally, I do think it is a hero. Like I think that it has benefited me greatly. It has been there for me when I didn't have an understanding of who I was. Like when I was really, really struggling with depression. Was I using video games as a crutch? Probably. Was it maybe verging towards addiction? Maybe. Right? But for me, I couldn't have known that I needed to go to do counseling, right? I didn't know that what I was feeling and what I was dealing with was depression at the time. I felt like rough. I didn't have the energy to pursue and chase after something. I knew I wanted to make games, and I knew for a while I was streaming, and finding the energy to go do that and trying to find your own success when you're not feeling like your mental wellness isn't there. When you give up on that to then play a video game, it can feel a lot like the video game is the problem. To me, the video game wasn't the problem. There was a bigger issue that I wasn't dealing with. And the video game was just a crutch for me to get through the day. It was, oh, that's too overwhelming for me to think about and go do. I'm just going to go play my video game. Right? I don't see that to me as like video games being a problem for me. It was, I needed to get to a point in my life where I could learn and understand and make the decision to go to counseling for myself. As soon as I made that choice, and a huge part of it was learning that I actually had ADHD. That was a huge part. And then from there, I was able to find a better balance of no, I have the energy. I'm going to go do the passionate thing that I wanted to do, move my career forward. Oh, and now I still have time for video games on the side, right? Like, oh, I did the thing. Cool. Yeah, I can still go play my game after and still get to play Expedition 33 and all the big games. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
cool. Thanks for sharing. I appreciate it.
yeah, no problem.
Well, thanks for being on the episode today. We appreciate your thoughts, your expertise, and we'll have to have you back again sometime.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. So we just had a great conversation with Keith. Fresh off it, hot off the press. What are your thoughts? What are your initial impressions? What stuck out to you?
My first impression is that he loves video games.
Oh, yeah.
And it was so awesome to have somebody so passionate about it. I felt quite undereducated when it came to video games around him. I was like, oh, man, I got to spend more time playing games.
Yeah, he's a gamer's gamer. He knows lots about video games.
Yeah. And he knows, like, the people behind it, the history. He watches documentaries on it. Like, I loved it. I loved having him on. He was fantastic.
Totally. That's exactly the kind of person we want on this podcast. Somebody who shares the passion, but is willing to talk about all the different aspects and not always some of the ugly aspects of the industry, of the impact they can have on us. And just appreciated that he was willing to have such an open and well-articulated conversation.
And he was so vulnerable.
Yeah.
I really appreciated him opening up about his own mental health journey. And then, of course, some of the things that have happened in his personal life. And so, Keith, if you're listening, I just want to say thank you for that. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think his whole kind of, and he talked about his pitch for a game he's wanted to work on.
Which are you thinking about us? What do you think? How much?
How much can we invest?
Yeah.
I don't have any to invest.
What is money?
I invest my passion and interest. Is that worth anything?
It can be. This is your passion and interest. So
that's right.
One day.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So he talked about in that pitch and in the surrounding conversation, his interest in the mechanics of video games and how lots of video games have used the story to explore mental health related themes, but only a select few have really used mechanics in a unique and interesting way to reflect those themes. And so that's something he'd be interested in developing at some point. And I thought that was really cool because even thinking about moments of video games that have impacted me, often some of them are narrative for sure, but some of them are very gameplay experience driven. I feel like I maybe talked about it in our first episode, but I always just think about that moment. Spoilers for Metal Gear Solid 3. They just did a remake, so it is relevant again.
Solid Snake.
Skip ahead if you don't want it. But at the end of that game, when you're fighting the final boss, you go through the fight, but then there's a cutscene, and then there's a moment where before finishing the fight, it makes you press a button, and it's not a complicated mechanic. You just press the button, and it just does it, and it finishes the cutscene.
Right.
But just something about that interactivity of I have to be the one to essentially pull the trigger.
Yeah.
That always stuck with me. It made it way more impactful.
Right.
And I remember just sitting there staring at it for a while and feeling emotions about it and be like, what happens if I just never press it? What do I do?
Yeah.
And that, I think that's an example of that interactivity. But that was one moment versus I think what Keith was talking about is how do you have those types of moments through
Or how do you create a whole game that's dedicated
Right.
to some form of mental health
Yeah.
without it being not so fun, without it being triggering, without it. And I think you made a good point where at some point, though, you just have to treat it like a piece of art. And you're not going to get it right for everybody. But it is your work of art. And then you just have to kind of pick a lane and choose.
Yeah.
There's lots of games that have tried in different ways, right? Whether you liked or not, we talked about Last of Us a lot. whether that story you liked or not, or whether you felt the environment was super depressive and oppressive. For me, after playing that game, the last choice that you have to make, and I won't make any spoilers, that's kind of made for you because it's part of the story, still stuck with me though.
Yeah.
Like the pivotal moment in that story. And I remember reading comments about it after, and different people had different perspectives on it.
Yeah.
You know, people with kids had very different perspectives on it with people who didn't. And I thought, I mean, that's what game is doing. It's reflecting real life. And our real life experiences are always going to be different.
For sure. And I think that's how you know they're doing a good job, right? If people have different experiences of it, different opinions on it, I think that's maybe not the only indicator of doing a good job, but I think that means you're touching on something if people have different reactions to it.
And you answered a question I was going to ask you, which is, have you experienced a moment in a game that felt pivotal like that?
Yeah, absolutely. That moment, there's a similar moment. Again, I won't spoil it, but near the end, almost at the very end of The Last of Us Part 2, there's a moment where there's a final boss fight that you're engaging in. And I set the controller down because I was like, I wonder, part of it was just curiosity.
Yeah.
Because I knew what they were going for, but I just thought, what if I just choose not to engage in this? Because after the journey I've gone through on this game, I don't want any part of this anymore. Yeah. And it ended in a fail state, which was interesting. And I thought they might have had an opportunity here to do something else, but that's obviously not the story they were telling. But yeah, that was another moment where having to engage in the fight, in the mechanics themselves, had an impact on me, and I wanted to not engage in it.
And do you think the mechanics is actually pressing the buttons, or is dialogue choices part of the mechanics? So like Mass Effect, Baldur's Gate, Dragon Age.
Dragon Age.
Let me try that again.
Nintendo's.
the Dragon Ages.
Yeah.
You get to pick different options that I think some of the storylines have mental health related choices and some feel so consequential where characters die.
Yeah.
And you're like, I guess I did that, you know?
Yeah.
So is it, when Keith was talking about mechanics, is he literally meaning like, I'm pressing this, I'm moving the character, it's really mechanical, or is choices enough to fill that gap?
I think it's a good question. I think choices certainly do count as mechanics. They're sort of narrative mechanics, and there is, because you're making a choice, there's an interactivity. And yeah, I think we've all had those experiences where we made a certain choice, led to an outcome maybe we didn't
like
predict.
You can't choose the evil path ever.
Right. Yeah. This is now a theme throughout our series so far. Goody two shoes Andrew over here. So I do think that counts as a mechanic. Yeah. And I think when Keith was talking about it, I think he probably meant it globally. Like all of these could potentially be mechanics. I think what I kind of picked up from the conversation is a lot of games have gotten good at using narrative mechanics like that. And he's interested, in addition to that, what other mechanics like movement or audio or those kind of things could you use in that way?
Actually feeling what depression feels like, or anxiety feels like, or there being consequences of the story progressing where your character... Like, I always thought how interesting it would be, like, you know, if your character loses a companion or goes through grief, that the next time you're playing the character, he's or they are heavier or harder to move, or, you know, like they're lower, like you mentioned, they don't want to go back to the dungeon, you know?
Totally. Yeah. I think there's a lot of interesting things. I think there's games that have done moments or sequences that are kind of like that. I always I feel like it's such a trope now in AAA games to have some, you know, drug-induced section, right? You're either drunk or you've been poisoned, and everything's... And in a way, that's what they're doing, right? The mechanics of what you're seeing. You can't move the character right.
No.
But I think it also... you know, we kind of laugh about it because we all know what that feels like. And in some ways, it's kind of annoying. Like, I wouldn't want to do that for an entire game. So I think that shows the dilemma Keith was talking about is
100%.
They've done it. Like, that's a great example. But would somebody want to do that would you want to play that for even a 4-hour indie game? I don't know.
But I was thinking back to our conversation with Kenzie, and I was like, what if it's just a game that you experience in a short burst to demonstrate a form of empathy or learning about that experience?
Yeah.
You know, because I think, you know, there's this argument in mental health whether simulation is explanation.
Right.
If I simulate something for you, does that explain that person's actual experience? So the classic example is like beer goggles, right? Have you ever done that?
Right.
Where, like, you're walking around and you're like, Yeah, I guess you're like, it's a nice way to elucidate the fact that you're really not able to see clearly and that sort of thing. But it obviously doesn't, it's not the experience of being drunk.
Yeah.
And you can never really convey that until you've been drunk. And that's the same thing with depression and anxiety. And sometimes there's a little bit of performativeness to it, especially in the accessibility space, where they're like, we'll put you in a wheelchair and you have to spend your whole day in a wheelchair. And you're like, see what it's like. And so some people will say, well, that's really like performative and insensitive. And yet other people are like, yeah, but how else are you going to explain to people that ableism exists all around you?
Right.
Right. That things are made for a certain group of people that are privileged with certain levels of ability. And I don't know what the right or wrong answer is, but what if a game elucidated depression or anxiety in a similar way?
Yeah.
It's obviously a simulation, but maybe it'll help people at least open the conversation and be like, well, oh, this is what you're feeling. Like I've struggled with depression for a long time, and I would love it if somebody just understood it without me having to explain it.
Right.
You know, and they're like, what is it? I'm like, just play this game.
Yeah.
This is what it feels like to try to get out of your bed.
Yeah.
You can press that X button as many times as you want. It's very hard, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and there is no perfect solution to it. But also, embracing that there is never going to be a way to fully make somebody else understand what they haven't experienced.
Yeah.
But if you can have a simulation that gets at pieces of it and just makes somebody think about it a little bit differently, gives them a new perspective on it, I think that can be helpful. And I think there probably are, and you know, maybe people in comments can point them out. I think there are examples where people have done this in the indie space where it's a smaller experience, and you know, ones that we haven't necessarily played. So those would be neat to check out, because I think you do have maybe a bit more freedom to do kind of more interesting, unique mechanics that maybe aren't fun in the traditional sense, but they serve a purpose.
Yeah.
But you can tolerate that for 3-4 hours versus, I think it's harder.
An entire 150-hour campaign.
Yeah. What about you? Any experiences where the mechanics of a gameplay experience have stuck with you?
Actually, one of my first experiences of seeing that mechanic, because Keith mentioned Chrono Trigger, there's a couple of mechanical changes that happen, changes in mechanics in the game that you experience. So the main character can get drunk or loopy, which is kind of interesting and fun. And I was a kid, and I'm like, I don't know what this means. But this is a little bit of a spoiler, but there's a part in the game where actually the main character, you can't play as the main character anymore. And I think that was like an interesting, mind-boggling thing, because you think you're going to take this character throughout the whole journey, and all of a sudden you can't play that character anymore for a certain period. And I think it was a great way. It's like an indirect way for you to get used to playing the other characters, because you've played JRPGs. There's lots of characters, you know, and so you like fall in love with the ones you like. And so it was cool to be like, no, in this section, especially Chrono Trigger does this, right? In this era, you're playing as Ayla. In this era, you're playing as Robo. In this era or this storyline, you're playing as Frog. And I'm like, that's a clever way to build empathy for different characters. Even if you're like, you were talking about this short term, like, even if I don't like playing this character that much, it's not my favorite, it's their storyline. And it's kind of like Dungeons and Dragons-esque, right? Like the idea of people having different storylines and you get to go down that pathway, I think is a clever way to, show empathy, especially like if you have a certain, I don't know, like you like to play certain things and then you double down on those things. This forces you to come out of your shell. Like in Last of Us does it too. Like the first one you get to play as Ellie. Yeah. You know, for a bit of the game. And you're like, oh yeah, this is, and like they changed the mechanics. She's much more vulnerable. She has a different fighting style. And you're like, oh, this is very interesting. Or in the Spider-Man games, you play as, you know, and I know a lot of people didn't like that part, and it wasn't my favorite part of the games too. But you're like, yeah, it's cool. You get to play as MJ. Like, and she doesn't have the powers. Right. But what resources can she use to, you know, make an impact? Yeah,
you can see what they're going for. Exactly. They're trying to give you a different experience. Yeah. And it is a good example of them taking the mechanics of the game that exist and flipping them a little bit so that you engage differently with it.
And you get to see as a kind of an average civilian what happens when Spider-Man comes and saves you. Right. You know? I think it's kind of a fun, like an interesting perspective. Totally. Yeah. But, you know, it's really hard to go from, I was literally swinging across New York
now I'm walking at a slow pace.
I know, come on. But somehow the game was so good, we still bought it. You
Yeah.
know, like we still did it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I love the Chrono Trigger example because that's a game where the multiple characters is a core mechanic of the game, I would say.
100%.
So then they use that to have you have a different experience and to serve the narrative. So yeah, there are all these cool examples, and so it's just thinking of ways that can be used for a mental health purpose. Which, yeah, I think there's lots of potential here, but I also see why it's not always easy to do. Because I think, Keith made a good point about wanting to do it right and having it not be reductive or
Yeah.
make it seem like cheesy or something, because mental health is a really serious and it's a really complex topic, and he was right that everybody experiences it differently, and yeah, I think it doesn't necessarily have to be universal, right? What he was saying near the end is make it reflective of his personal experience, but I think it can be a tricky thing when you're approaching these topics in any form of medium, and there will always be people who probably don't resonate and criticize and maybe have valid criticisms too, but it's tough to enter into this space because this is a very vulnerable experience that you're trying to touch on for people.
And this is a debate that they're having across mediums, right? So not just video games. And like, what are your thoughts on, like, do you think they should add trigger warnings?
Yeah.
He mentioned the example of the beginning of Last of Us.
Yeah.
And how he couldn't really watch that cutscene now as a new father. And I'm like, well, I guess you could add a trigger warning, but then it gives away what's going to happen in some ways too.
Yeah.
So then you're like, is art just supposed to surprise you too? And then part of life is this, you kind of have to, because, life doesn't come with a trigger warning.
Right.
I wish it did.
Yeah. So sometimes that would be
I know.
nice.
Like, I wish I'm coming out today. What's going to happen?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it doesn't. And so in some ways you just have to deal with it, hopefully with the support systems you have in place. But what do you think?
Oh, yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I think there's lots of different perspectives you could bring into it. I think, because I agree, in some ways that takes away the impact. Like, sometimes part of a narrative is the surprise and not knowing what's coming. And yet, I mean, I'm biased as a psychologist. I want to be sensitive to that things can bring up people's own emotions and traumas and past experiences. I think with games, I mean, part of it is it's why they have ratings. And so if you're going to play a mature game and, it usually says rated M for mature for themes of violence or whatever it is. And so I think...
But those ratings don't cover things like grief. Or
no, they don't get super specific.
Yeah.
But I think it's... that at least gives a little bit, and there's a little bit of responsibility on the consumer to know, like, what am I engaging with, and could it potentially carry something that's going to affect me. And so... I make that choice sometimes. I'm not there's certain horror games I'll play, but I don't play all of them because I know that stuff affects me.
Yeah.
And I generally, you can tell what the content is and the rating, and you can make a choice. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's more about experiences where it's maybe less expected, or, I know there was some controversy around, I don't remember what university, but a university course that had whether university courses should be giving trigger warnings before certain lectures or not.
Right.
And some people said yes, some people were really against that. And I think in that case, I can see the argument because there is no rating on a university course. And so you don't really know. And the topic of a course could be very general. And so do you expect to go to a course on, even if it is an English course, say, but do you always know exactly what you're going to hear going in? And so maybe there's a space for a bit of a content warning there saying, hey, today we're going to cover this, this, and this, just so you know. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think I echo a lot of what you said. I think it's contextual and circumstantial. I think the more we learn about mental health, there's probably room to expand ratings to include something like that. It doesn't have to specifically say depression or anxiety, but this game explores themes of grief or something like that. And you can just leave that general statement. I don't think it would take away from the experience overall, because I think the majority of people who engage don't even read the ratings anyways, or don't know what they mean. They just go in and play. But then for that person who may be thinking about these things, it is there as an added failsafe. And that's ultimately what trigger warnings are. If you feel like you're not going to be triggered, you're going to ignore it. You're going to read past it quickly.
Right. It's not for you.
It's not for you. It's for the people that we're trying to support. during that time. So I don't know. I don't think there's a harm in it. And sometimes I feel like we're too rigid on like, we need to know this will work before we implement it, you know? And sometimes it's like, I don't know, try it. And then if it doesn't work, like a trigger warning is really not harmful. Like, you know, if it really comes down to the fans being like, well, that ruined the whole story for me, then I'm like, okay, I take that as feedback.
Right.
And let's, you know, let's change it up.
Right.
I certainly don't think it's like going to cause more harm.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting thing. And I agree. I mean, generally speaking, I think it's just a heads up, right? Yeah. I mean, speaking of, you know, our episode with Kenzie, we had a content warning at the beginning of that episode because of the themes it talked about, which could be upsetting for some people. And I think it serves that same purpose of it doesn't change what we're talking about. It doesn't mean we're restricting what the themes we're going to talk about, but it just says, hey, for those of you who might be affected, just so you know, so you can make an informed decision.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see that in games and what is the reaction to that. And I mean, I'm sure there would be a reaction.
There's
to that.
always
There's a reaction to everything.
No one's ever happy. So
yeah. Any final thoughts on our conversation with Keith before we move into our skill testing question?
No, I mean, I just really appreciated having someone who was willing to talk about his own experience and, of course, games in such a like fully expansive way. He really got to demonstrate his knowledge. I am really curious to see how our fans will respond. And if you have any ideas on games that do this well, or ideas and things you'd like to see developers do. I mean, part of our hope is that some developers are listening to this podcast, even publishers are listening to this podcast and are looking to see, oh, hey, like, this is a solution or this is an idea. You know, we're your free focus group.
That's
what
right.
we are.
Yeah, and we are single-handedly going to change the video game industry.
110%.
I don't think that's too bold to say.
Not at all. No trigger warning needed. What about you? Any final thoughts? It must be nice to have your friend.
Yes, it was nice to have my friend. Always nice to have a friend on. Finally, haven't had a friend on any of these episodes at all. True. Just kidding. No, it was nice to talk to him. I mean, I could talk to Keith about games all day. Anytime we get together, that's usually part of our conversation. So it was nice to just have him on and have that be filmed, and it felt pretty natural. And I just appreciated what he was sharing, and it was neat to have that side of it, somebody on the game dev side and kind of their insights on it and how the mental health themes filter into even just when you're thinking about mechanics, when you're thinking about making those design choices. I think it's really neat to hear that side.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Skill testing question.
Are you ready?
Are you?
No. Okay, I'll go first.
Okay, do it.
Okay, so skill testing question. You and Keith bonded over the fact that you both have this love of Chrono Trigger.
Love it.
A classic JRPG.
I love it.
That I've never played. I have played part of it.
And you gave up after playing a part of it?
Well, I think I was playing on the DS.
I haven't cried so much in an episode.
And I didn't love the DS as a system.
It's not great.
Yeah.
It's not great.
I'll play it at some point. So in Chrono Trigger, and part of our conversation we just had was how it would swap out what characters you could play as. Some you can't play as at certain points in the game. How many playable characters? Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
How many playable characters are in Chrono Trigger?
Okay. All right. There's Chrono. Then you get Marl. Then you get Luca. Then you go into Lean's castle and you lose Marl. You have to go find her with Luca. Who comes next right after that? I think right after that you get Robo. Then you go back. Then you get Ayla. Or maybe Frog. I think Frog comes before that. Glenn. Sir Glenn. And then you get mages. Optionally, though. You can't always get them, so it's kind of a spoiler result.
Yeah.
7. Am I missing anyone?
I will give away nothing with my facial expression.
I don't know what that is. I could be right or I could be wrong.
I know.
Am I missing someone?
I have
Who
such
am I
a poker
missing?
face.
Am I missing someone? Who am I missing? I feel like I'm missing someone. No, I think that's it.
Locking in your final answer, 7?
Yeah.
You're correct.
Yes.
You did it.
Yes.
7 playable characters.
Yes. I haven't
Well
played that game
done.
in such a long time.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
good. I was impressed. You remember it well enough. You could go through the different
Yeah,
beats. And,
that's how I had to do it. It's my
Yeah.
mind palace. It's my
Nice.
time palace.
Whoa.
Yes.
Very
Nice.
cool.
Okay, I have an interesting one, and I don't think you're gonna get this because it's very hard.
Oh, okay.
But it's interesting.
Okay.
We were talking about mechanics. What game was one of the first games to introduce the HP mechanic, putting your health bar in a game?
The HP mechanic.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's interesting.
It's a tough one. That's a tough one.
That's really interesting. Okay. I was hoping you were going to ask about like when joysticks came in.
Why?
I don't know, because I feel like I know the answer to that one.
You can defer to that if you want to.
No, that's okay. Well, I don't know if it's true. I feel like Ape Escape was one of the first games that used because I feel like PlayStation.
Do joysticks count with arcade games?
Oh, I was thinking home console.
Home consoles?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's an offshoot.
Okay.
Okay, because you could think of an HP mechanic even as the hearts, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's kind of like that's a health bar essentially.
Yeah.
So I mean, my initial instinct, but you said it's hard, so it's probably not this. But my initial instinct is to say Legend of Zelda.
I knew you were going to say Zelda. I knew it. I knew you were going to say I should have just said it at the same time as you. Especially since you said hearts.
Yeah. But that's not right.
It's not. It's earlier than Zelda. This is why I thought
Earlier
it was
than
hard.
Zelda.
This is unfair.
Okay. Was it on the NES?
Or
was it earlier than that?
Could even be earlier than that.
Oh.
Yeah. It's an 80s. It's an 80s game.
In the okay. Well, I know. I mean, Pong didn't have a health bar. Neither did Tetris.
Could you imagine? Good callbacks, though.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. I don't know my old games well enough, I don't think.
There's a game called Rogue. Did you know
Rogue.
this game?
I have heard of Rogue.
Yeah,
I don't
but you
know
have to
well.
play it. Yeah, it's one of the first games to ever use a numerical system to calculate your health.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
I just looked it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Good one. So now we got to go play Rogue. This is
Okay.
the best part of our skill testing questions because then we can go back and go, all right, I have to find this.
That's right.
Thank you so much for bringing your friend on, man. That was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for letting him come on. That was
Of
really
course.
nice of you.
It hurt me to share you, but I was able to.
You tolerated your own jealousy.
I did.
For the
That's
better
called
of the
growth.
podcast.
That's called post-traumatic growth.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. That showed good emotional regulation. What interventions or tools did you use throughout our episode?
Deep breathing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thanks for joining me, as always.
And thank you for joining me.
All right.
Huzzah.